Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Welcome to another episode of the For Love and Money podcast. Today I am interviewing Cassandra Treadwell. Cassandra is the co-founder and CEO of So They Can and co-founder and CEO of Essence of Humanity. Now, Cassandra's career background is medico-legal. She gained her master's degree in medical law and ethics from King's College, London University. While she has enjoyed living overseas, she chose to come back to Wanaka in New Zealand to raise her 4 children in the same nurturing community that she grew up in. She also loves living in New Zealand for the running, tramping, skiing, and general outdoor lifestyle it enables. Cassandra spent a year in Argentina on student exchange when she was 16, and she spent time at an orphanage. And there she was confronted for the first time with poverty in the developing world. The injustice affected her greatly and sculpted her future career choices and charity involvement. And as a new mother, this empathy took her back to the communities of East Africa that she'd become acquainted with while she was traveling, and a drive to improve the lives of some of the world's most impoverished children whose families suffered deprivation and displacement due to political violence. Working in Africa now, Cass gained so much from the people she works with, as she describes in her TEDx talk, which we will include a link in the show notes. And I hope you do watch it because it's amazing, and I hope we get to speak about it today. The community there has taught her to be grateful for what she has got rather than focus on what she has not got. The children have helped her to live in the present and enjoy the simple pleasures of life, and the communities of Kenya and Tanzania have taught her the value of Ubuntu, I am because of you, and the importance of global balance. Cass was very honoured to be nominated for the 2015 New Zealander of the Year and to be one of the final 10 people that were considered for this prestigious award. In 2018, she was a finalist in the New Zealand Women of Influence Awards. Cass, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast. Thank you so much for making time to chat to us today.
Oh, thank you, Carolyn. It's lovely to be part of this. I think it's a great podcast. I particularly love the title.
Thank you very much. And when it comes to love, I've learned a little bit about your story talking to you and doing some research, and clearly love runs deep through what you're doing. So I will open with a question that I ask all of my guests. Thinking about purpose in your working life, does love have a role to play?
Oh, yes, absolutely. What a great question. Yes, without a doubt. I've just got back from 3 weeks on the ground in Africa. Actually, it makes me quite emotional even asking that question, but it's just that you're just surrounded by love from children and their parents and the school community who have, to our standards, no material wealth or assets, but the abundance of love that they share with me, who they know, but I took 2 of our team that they hadn't met before, so strangers to them at that point, was, and always does, just is quite astounding and stays with me forever. So yes, to answer that question, love plays a tremendous and critical role for communities, giving it to us, but also So They Can sort of family internationally that shining that love back to them.
And I mean, your organisations, they're non-profit organisations, so it won't surprise people that love runs deeply through that. But what do you think is the opportunity for for-profit business? You yourself understand the power that love can bring to your working life, to an organisation, to how you interact with people and how you approach opportunities and overcome hurdles. I just love your thoughts on, imagine if it ran through business.
There wouldn't be any poverty if it ran through business. I think when a business is conscious of that relationship of love, then I think that provides the purpose. As an example, you mentioned Essence of Humanity, which was a social business that I created with my friend Stacey Fraser, who's a beautiful skincare developer and creator. And we used natural products from Africa and mixed them with products from New Zealand and created a natural skincare range. But the purpose of creating that business was to generate income for So They Can. So it was driven, that business was and is driven by love of humanity, really, the concept that we are one human race. And if we remember that constantly and remember that when others suffer, we suffer, then you can't really go wrong. It's a good sort of driving guidance, I think. There's a beautiful African philosophy. It's a Swahili word. It's Ubuntu, Ubuntu. And Nelson Mandela would talk about Ubuntu as meaning I am because of you. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu spoke a lot about Ubuntu, and he would define it as how our personal well-being is deeply connected to the well-being of others. It's just beautiful how that concept of one human race is summed up in one Swahili word, and it probably is demonstrative of their attitude to life. But yes, to answer your question, I think if a love for humanity and others was an integral part of all businesses, then yeah, there wouldn't be any poverty in the world, I believe.
This idea of Ubuntu is incredibly powerful, and I know through your TEDx talk you shared stories that really brought it to life. Yeah, how do you think today, as we live in a time where this movement of purpose-led business is growing? I've actually just last week attended the Purpose Conference, and 2 days, and oh my God, it just made me understand now, to my extreme happiness, that the movement is unstoppable.
That's exciting.
Honestly, it is the innovation, the drive, the passion of what I'm seeing out there from businesses that are, starting with the problem they want to solve and then building a business around it. It's incredible. And this idea of Ubuntu is it's such a human concept. It's such a simple concept, but it is so incredibly powerful. Do you have any thoughts on, how people can connect to that more? How you can bring that idea to life to people as we go through this time, this shift in time, where purpose in business is threading its way through?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I'm so glad to hear you use that word unstoppable. I think there is a younger generation particularly that have recognized and felt the sense of happiness that comes from a purpose-driven business and career. And I think the nod that in the past businesses have had to sort of tick in a box almost of we'll give 2% of our profits isn't enough for that generation. So I think they are, as you say, creating businesses to solve problems. And it is incredibly exciting. And I think it's the way forward for the problems themselves, but also for individuals to be happy. And I've had so many, I call them lessons from my Ubuntu classroom of Africa. These people, the communities that we work with on the ground, so we have 33,000 children that we support across our 47 schools. And if you combine that with our empowerment programs of microfinance for women and clinics and community health and child wellbeing, it's 45,000 people that we work with. So I've had many opportunities with those amount of people to really understand the concept of Ubuntu and get those lessons from my classroom of Africa. And the first one was actually when I first went to find a project to get involved in back in 2009, and it was just after the Kenyan election violence, which was very analogous to the Rwandan genocide. And it was ironic because what triggered me to go to Africa, I watched the movie Hotel Rwanda. But I ended up in Africa in 2009. I heard about all these IDPs, or internally displaced persons camps, as they were referred to, and they were Kenyan refugees, so refugees in United Nations tents and refugee camps, but they were Kenyan residents. So I went to visit a number of these refugee camps, and they were all pretty horrendous. There was a lot of chaos. And at one camp, this woman came up to me, and she was just watching me, and I'd spent a few days amongst these IDP camps, and they're fairly emotionally and physically hard. And she saw me, and she was holding her baby, which was the same age as my little Rocco that I'd left at home, so about 8 months old. And she just gestured for me to come into her tent, and I did. And she handed me her baby and for a cuddle, and I just had 10 minutes of calm from all the chaos outside in this refugee camp. And my Swahili is embarrassingly bad, and she didn't speak English, obviously. And we sat on the dirt floor of her tent, but we just had this kind of lovely moment between two mothers. And when I left, someone asked me, do you know her story? And I didn't. And they said that during that 2007 election violence, sort of 12 months prior, her husband and children who had been murdered, and she was raped, and the baby that I was holding was a result of that rape. But the lesson that I hold forever from that story for me was, when I was with her, I gestured and asked her the name of her baby, and she told me that she'd named her baby Miracle. And it just astounds me even today. I tell that story a few times, and it is in my TEDx, but the fact that she had the courage and the determination and the strength, after all she went to literally turn what I would have chosen, because it is a choice, I believe, to see as a disaster into literally a miracle. And I just admire that strength and courage to choose an attitude on life. So that was my first Ubuntu lesson. And since then, I've just had so many. They have no material wealth, the communities we work with, but they have so much emotional wealth. And they teach me to be grateful, as you said, for what I've got and not focus on what I don't have. I think that's a bit of an affliction we have in the West. We focus on what we don't have, whereas the happiness you get from focusing on what you do is quite extreme. So they live in the moment more than we do here. They have this incredible sense of community. They don't have any social welfare systems, so they have to rely on each other. Again, that one human race reliance on each other. And from that, they're dancing and celebrating life, which there's just so much more joy there than we have here, because we're so isolated and fixated on our own thing. So that sense of community brings them more joy. And then also this concept of death. They live very closely to death. And I think there's something in that as well. They wake up and are grateful to be alive because their neighbor might not have woken up alive. And so they embrace the moment and the day and the joy and the celebration. And it's just good for us. They're just really good for our emotional health. And I think there's a really beautiful reciprocal relationship between us sharing our material wealth and then them teaching us how to live better. So I'm not
Thank you for sharing that story, and about the baby called Miracle. It's an incredible story, and for me, as I listen to it, it makes me realize how far we in the West have gone from what really matters within the human condition. And I know that is the thing that's driving you. It's all about that connection and the reciprocity of giving, the value of giving, not just to the people, but to the person that's giving. I'd love you, Cass.
Sorry to interrupt, but I would love to offline talk to you more about that, because I did that TEDx talk like 6 or 7 years ago. I've never watched it. I'm too embarrassed to watch it. But
you've got to watch it. It's amazing. I've watched it twice now, and it's like, I actually need to go through it again, because there are just truth bombs in there.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I must admit, I'm too scared to watch it, so that's nice to hear. But I made a real sort of commitment to myself way back then to do exactly what you've asked me. What is the answer to bringing that sense of Ubuntu to the Western developed world? And I don't feel like I've done it yet. And so maybe you can help me in that regard. We are starting a few sort of campaigns, which hopefully brings our communities into the world of us here. If ideally I'd take everyone to Africa, but we can't. So hopefully through, short videos and connections and pieces like that, we can sort of bring that world and that classroom of Africa back here. But I don't feel like I've nailed it yet. So all suggestions I'd greatly appreciate from you.
I'd love to continue talking to you and putting our heads together as to how we do that. Obviously, this podcast is one way we can do that, and I'm sure there are no doubt many more ways. Before we get into So They Can and your campaign, which is really interesting. So, I urge people to listen all the way through, because what Cass is doing is absolutely incredible. And by the way, the numbers you just talked about, the 45,000 people that you work with, that is just incredible. Absolutely incredible. So congratulations. But can you share with our listeners, can you share your journey? What has brought you to this point? You've touched on a few things, but if you could just give us the sort of overall picture, that would be amazing.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, my background's, I've got no experience in the development field at all, but my background is law and medicine. So I did my law degree, and then I went to London and did a master's in medical law and ethics. So I loved it. Half of us were lawyers and half were doctors. Just really realized sort of the disjunct between the two professions and how we could get them to work closer together. So anyway, I then moved into the medical law field. I'd work in hospitals, actually on site, and I would be working in the ICU or new birth technology, or on the new NICU ward, around sort of both start of life and end of life, and the medico-legal issues around that, trying to protect some of our doctors who are always acting in the best interests of the patients from that sort of gap between the law and medicine. So loved it, really loved it. But I moved from New Zealand, where I'm from, where I worked in the hospitals, to Sydney, and thinking I could do the same medico-legal work in-house in hospitals. But I quickly learned that you outsource all your medico-legal work to big law firms, and there's not a space within the hospitals over in Australia. So I didn't want to go back to the big law firms. I had done some big commercial law when I first graduated from university, and it wasn't for me. So I kind of took that pause, and I was pregnant with our third child, to actually think about what I wanted to do with my life. And that's when I watched the movie Hotel Rwanda in the middle of the night when I was feeding one of my children, and said to myself, right, I have to do something to probably just alleviate the guilt I felt about the atrocities that are allowed to go on around the world. So I took myself off to beautiful Balmoral Beach in Sydney the next morning and went for my run, and just sort of said, I have to keep running till I come up with some sort of solution. So during that run, I thought of the concept of what we call Eat So They Can, which was I'd hold a global dinner party. So friends that I had dotted around the world at that point, and I said to them all, can you all just hold a dinner party on the same night and ask people to bring a donation rather than food? And we raised $25,000 from that, incredibly. So I took that money. It blew me away, actually. And I took that to Africa looking for a project. I had backpacked through Africa immediately after I graduated from university. So I knew some areas, and I knew a woman in Nairobi. And so she and I went to visit, as I mentioned, these IDP camps. And so they were all horrendous, but at the end of one long day, I went to the Pipeline IDP camp in Nakuru, which is 2.5 hours north of Nairobi. And they didn't ask for food or money like all the others had, understandably, because they were desperate. They asked me to meet with their committee, and they had, in this IDP camp of 6,500 people living on 16 acres of land, they had created a committee of 47 people, each representing the 47 different tribes in Kenya. So the lawyer in me and the justice value in me suddenly went, oh, I really like that concept. So I went into this sort of tin shed full of chickens and people, and there's this committee were at the head of this kind of congregation, and they had this beautiful plan mapped out for someone. They had the resilience that is another lesson I've learned from this community, and they were waiting patiently, and they sort of said, can you build us a school? Can you educate our children? And they talked about how So 600,000 Kenyans had fled from the west of Kenya to the east during this election violence in 2007. And what happened, to backtrack a little bit, that violence occurs because a week before the 2007 elections, one tribe comes down and looks to massacre another tribe so that they're literally not around to vote.
Oh, God.
Very analogous to the Rwandan genocide sort of situation. And when I sat with this committee, their chairperson, Paul, said to me, we believe education is the answer because it breaks the poverty cycle, which I'd heard and understood. But he went that step further and said, education enables human beings to make good choices. And I was really fascinated by that. And he later explained to me the detail of what he meant by that is that it's horrific, but when you're desperate and starving and your kids are dying, you might take the $10 to join a massacre. And so if you're educated and have choices, you won't do that. So I was fascinated by that, and I was impressed by them. And they then walked me to a 5-acre block of land just 2 kilometres away from their IDP camp. And they said, we know that this area is designated by the Ministry of Education to be a public school. Can you convince them that you'll work with us to build a school for our children here? So that's kind of how it all started. And after, a long time on a cold government corridor floor, I was allowed to go and see the regional education officer, and I did manage to convince them that we would build a school, public school. We always wanted to work in the government system and not, steal the land and build a house for ourselves with a swimming pool. And it started from them. So that's when we started. And at this point, I was joined by my very good friend, Kerry Chittenden in Sydney, who was my neighbour and co-founder. So then we worked with local engineers and builders. And in 2010, we opened Aberdare Ranges Primary School in May to our first 120 little 4-year-olds, preschoolers. And then every year after that, we would come back, would fundraise back in Australia and New Zealand. And then we would build another 3 classrooms and bump them all up until by 2010, we had a full school, which now graduates 1,200 students a year. And halfway through this process, of course, we were working closely with Aberdare. And then we decided to change the model from being so capital construction heavy to working with the government schools and focusing on what goes on inside the classrooms. So then we started partnering with other government schools that were already built but very dilapidated. Not enough teachers, not enough classrooms. The teachers needed upskilling, the head teachers needed training, the parent community needed engagement. So now we have 47 schools across Kenya and Tanzania, government schools, that we do construction work with, and other 10 education projects that we put into those schools. Things like learning reading, writing and arithmetic, the basics, but also really important projects like keeping girls in school. So 85% of our girls suffer female genital cutting and get sold before they're 10 years old as the 4th or 5th wife to a 65-year-old man sort of thing. So we work very closely with the local community to get our children sent to school and keep them in school. And then also just things like My Voice is a project. So it's about human rights, so the rights of the boy and the girl, that they're not the property of their fathers and brothers, that they don't have to be sold. And then also teacher improvement, teacher development, school board of management, training, all that kind of stuff. So, and then in 2012, we actually went to Tanzania and discovered that the quality of government teachers there isn't as good as in Kenya. So we needed to solve the teaching issue. So we built a teachers training college from scratch, which is now the top performing teachers college in the whole of Tanzania, public and private. And that graduates about 200 teachers into the Tanzanian public school system each year. So that's
I'm just gonna ask you to pause there for a moment, because Cass, you make it sound so simple, right? and I just want to go back when that committee asked you to build a school. What was your initial reaction to that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. You pick up on interesting things. You know me so well. I've thought about that a lot. Sometimes people say to me, how did you decide whether you would or not? And I remember leaving that tin shed and walk. It was getting dark, and walking back through this IDP camp, and the children are amazing. They'll run up to you. You have about 4 children off each arm, and they're smiling and laughing, but they're in bare feet. It's cold. It's quite high, the altitude in Nakuru, so it was getting cold. They've got bare feet, shorts, ripped shirts on. It's getting dark and it's a bit scary. There's lots of people around, but they're still laughing and smiling and holding my hand. And I got in my car and drove off. And I'm trying to answer your question, because I realized when I got in my car and let go of those children's hands that there was never any choice. You know, I had the ability to at least try to provide them what they had asked me for. So at that point, I didn't feel there was a choice, really. And I'm glad. I was excited as well. I was really excited because I felt that I'd found what I had gone over there to look for, which was a sustainable, sort of deep-seated way to break the poverty cycle for generations. And I had found a community that were prepared to work hard to do that with me. And I really wanted to work in the government system so that they had the skin in the game, and it was their project. So I was excited. There wasn't a decision to make. When you're in that environment and you're walking through the mud and you can get in the car and drive to a clean bed, you know, and of course you do what you can. But yes, I went looking for something, and I started off my 3 weeks there. I started off with this sort of friend I knew from my backpacking days, going to orphanages and schools in the Nairobi slums, saying, what do you need? Because I was looking for a project and to spend the 25,000 we'd raised. And these schools and orphanages would say, they'd give me a shopping list, and I'd go into town and I'd buy the blankets and the pots and pans and the beans, and I'd come back and I'd sort of say, how long will this last? And they'll say, thank you, that's going to last a whole month. And I'd go, oh, that's just so, where's the sustainability to that? So I was really grateful to have heard about these IDPs, and then to go and meet them, and then to come up with a plan that was ticked all my boxes of working with the community, working with the government, having a sustainable exit strategy, and actually changing the lives of those children so that they would never have to ask again.
Enjoying the podcast? If you're looking for more inspiration, head to our website, thecauseeffect.com.au, for more resources on how you can start using your business as a force for good. Or buy the For Love and Money book. Every copy sold allows us to protect 1 square metre of rainforest. Help us save 10,000 square metres by 2025.
There are a couple of things I want to pick up there. I mean, you talked about how seeing that movie Hotel Rwanda, you know, that's what actually just challenged you and got you to, what did you say when you went for the run till you solved the problem?
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, because another guest of mine, James Bartle from Outland Denim, he started Outland Denim, which employs Cambodian, actually it's extended to beyond Cambodian women, but to keep them in safety from the sex trafficking trade, and to educate them and give them a living wage and give them skills and so forth. But that actually started when he saw the movie Taken.
Right.
With Liam Neeson. So it's really interesting, because many of us go to movies, many of us are appalled at what we see and, you know, want to do something. But for you and James, you know, you actually did, and that's amazing. And I want to congratulate you and thank you for that, but also highlight the fact that you did, and you've built something significant out of it. And that takes me to the second point I want to explore, is how, you know, you had no experience in this. How did you do it? I don't know how you're going to answer this, but how did you do it? I assume it was building community around you, but
yeah, and that's I'm very conscious and embarrassed about people congratulating me, because actually I was going to say only, but my one strength is I gather good people around me. So and that's why I feel embarrassed when people, congratulate me, because I'm really a very small cog in this whole so they can family and creation. So great question. So as I mentioned earlier, when I'd gone and met these IDPs, I came back and I asked my good friend Kerry to come back with me and get involved. So Kerry is an incredible event manager. That's her career, and she had run events at the Olympics. And so then we started doing really cool fundraisers and raising lots more money. She's also a superb project manager, so she is great with construction and details and all the spreadsheets and things that I'm terrible at. Then we hired great staff. We had a very clear plan. I personally wanted to have 100% localized community on the ground. So I wanted them to be 100% Kenyan and Tanzanian, our team on the ground. And probably about 7 years ago, we achieved that. So what we started doing is we would put an expat and a local into the same role. So country manager, for example, and they would shadow each other. So our expat would educate and train up our local on what we needed back here to raise the money. So we needed fairly quick responses to our emails. We needed timely turning up to meetings. We needed good photos, that kind of stuff. And then in turn, our local would educate our expat on what was needed for that role to work in that country. So the government connections, the fact that you do sit in meetings for 3.5 hours and hear about everyone's family for the first 2 hours before you get to the business. So they taught us a lot in those regards. And then we could just slowly exit the expat and the local stayed. And that has worked really, really well. I have an incredible team on the ground. That was one of the highlights for me in my last trip that I've just got back from, was the fact that I haven't been able to get over there for 2 years because of COVID. And I was wondering what everything would look like. And it surpassed all my expectations because we didn't have to pull any expats out. Nothing stopped. In fact, we just expanded our development work into COVID prevention and security and safety work. I was there 2 years ago and I'd go to our schools and there are a number of children there, but one of our big goals is getting more children coming to school and the community is sensitized to the importance of education. This trip, I would turn up at our schools and there would be 600 or so parents turning up and surrounding the car. And, I'd get out of the car and they surround you and throw beads and cloaks all over and blankets. And then they sing and dance you up to the school, which could be a kilometre away, and you're singing and dancing for 10 minutes with them. And then they will sit and have this whole school community of 600 to 800 people and children telling you the impact that my local team had made over the last 2 years to them. It was incredible, and I'm incredibly proud of them. So the answer to your question is I didn't really have to have a lot of experience. I just had to be good at recruiting our initial people, and then they now in turn, our country managers, Boniface in Kenya and Rosalind in Tanzania, they are amazing at recruiting exceptional staff. And we don't have to do it often because they've stayed with us, they're loyal. The other thing I love about our people on the ground, our team, our managers on the ground and our whole team, is that we made a decision to go into a third community called East Pokot about 6 years ago now, and it is the poorest county out of 369 counties in the whole of East Africa, which is unusual because Kenya is relatively wealthy compared to, say, Malawi, which is in East Africa. So you see these United Nations charts which have from a poverty level, all the counties in Malawi and Mozambique, for example, are listed, and then right at the bottom, right at the top of that is East Pokot in Kenya, and it's like the Wild West. It's an incredibly harsh, pastoral, environmentally tough place to live, but it also suffers from cattle raiding. So the tribes, the boys, when they're getting to 13 or 14, they'll go overnight and raid cattle to get some cattle for the dowry to marry a girl, for example. And it causes a lot of unrest and the military get called in. So it can be quite dangerous, is my point there. So I said to my team before I went up there, I said, look, I come here twice a year. You're the ones that are going to be on the cold face. Are you sure you want to go in there? It's no other NGOs are really in there. And they just all said, this is what we're here for, Cass. This is what the purpose driven that you talk about, Carolyn. This is why we're at so they can, because we can go to the places that need us that others don't go to. And it was quite a defining moment for me of the incredible team that I'm lucky enough to have. So, yeah.
That's amazing. And, you know, your strength, your superpower, gathering people around you. I might rephrase that as building movements to create change,
I
you know,
like
positive
that.
change.
I do like that.
Yeah, honestly, I feel I think it's so important that you don't underplay that, because it's a beacon for people who don't necessarily have skills to build schools or whatever it may be. But it's knowing this is what I'm good at and this is what I can do. This is how I can use that strength and that superpower to create something meaningful, you know, some change. And I want to really highlight that to our listeners, because I feel like so many people feel disempowered. They want to do something, but it's like, what can I do? I don't
Yeah.
have the skills, I don't have the capability. And it's a theme that I believe is so important. And I mentioned the Purpose Conference, and story after story from the Purpose Conference was from founders of businesses in categories that they had no experience in. And you know, you presume they thought no skills suitable for that experience, but it was the problem that they were solving that was the driver, and the ability to bring in experts and find their way through, which is exactly what you've done. So I think that's a huge thing to highlight, and I think that's
And I
something.
think, Carolyn, you're so right, and it's so important. And I would absolutely want that message to get out there. The most powerful component or tool that I look for, if people are coming, want to be involved in what we're doing, is just passion and commitment. I have people with PhDs in international development sending me CVs, and I sort of say, how much time have you had on the ground? Or what do you believe in this? Or are you prepared to go this extra mile? And I would take the person that was passionate over the PhD in international development any day. But I do know what you're saying about it's overwhelming, the amount of need. And I feel particularly from COVID, and unfortunately, I feel we've gone back to that sort of nationalistic, locked in a bit, which is the opposite of what the world needs, which is the whole global perspective of one human race working together. But I think that it's made people scared about not knowing how to help, and it is overwhelming. I personally remember a terrible story and footage I saw on the news a number of years ago from Iraq about girls being, in a cage taken through the streets, and they were about to get killed. It was just a horrible graphic that just totally rocked me. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help them. And I think what I want So They Can to be about is providing an opportunity and a family for people to get involved, so that they feel that there is some solution to the horrors and the atrocities in the world. And that's what I do. I hear those stories in Iraq, or things that I'm not involved in, and I'll Zoom some of our children on the ground, or if I'm over there, I'll go and sit in one of our schools and just be surrounded by those children going, we're doing something to help in the world. And I welcome anyone to reach out to me and go, I don't know how I can help, but I want to. I before starting So They Can, I went to a number of NGOs and said, look, I don't have any skills. I'm just a lawyer. And can I help in any way? And they all sort of said no, but would welcome your money. I mean, I understand that, but I understand that was their perspective. I don't really understand it, because it definitely takes a village. So I welcome anyone that feels they could add some value, whether it's financially or whether it's, do you know that you could get water balls from this place? Or I'm happy to help you run a fundraiser, or I'm happy to come and just meet the children and spend some time with them. So yeah, I feel it's important for purpose-driven businesses or NGOs to welcome everyone and make them realize that you don't have to be specialists in this area. You just have to be passionate.
Absolutely. And everyone can do something, whether it's doing something yourself with your skills, or whether it's giving money. And I do want to I do want you to tell us about the campaign you're about to launch, because I think it's a brilliant campaign and it just makes it so easy. But before we do, I'd like you to give some context to it with, you talk about the real value of giving as providing connection to people. And I think that is such a powerful concept. So I'd just love you to talk about that a bit if you can.
Yeah, I am on a bit of a mission, and it's part of my TED Talks, to change the perception and definition of charity from what I believe it is today, which can be seen as the great white savior going in to save these poor people out of pity, to what it truly is, which is a reciprocal exchange and partnership of, as I said before, emotional and material wealth. And this was, it triggered in me because we started a children's village because I went to a dump site early on, rubbish dump, ironically called the Hilton Rubbish Dump. I did approach them for funding. And there were over 1,000 children living off this rubbish dump in Nakuru in Kenya. And they are orphaned and vulnerable children, orphaned from either that 2007 Kenyan elections or HIV. And the first time I went in there, I was challenged to go in there by a local. I love, as again, their determination, who came to me and said, "You talk about supporting the poorest of children. Have you ever been to our local rubbish dump?" And I hadn't. So I went up there and I saw this boy scavenging through the rubbish. So they live in the rubbish dump. They burrow in at night to stay warm amongst needles and rubbish. And it's a horrendous place that no one should have to see, let alone a child live in. But they try and make some money out of finding what they can in the rubbish dump and selling it. But anyway, so this boy was trying to find things in the rubbish, and I went up to him and I said hi, and I put my hand out to shake his hand, and he went to shake my hand, and then he looked at his hand and then he pulled it away and he said the words "Naiona Haya" in Swahili, and I didn't know what they meant at the time. But when I went back later, I asked someone, "What does "Naiona Haya" mean?" And they looked at me and said, "It means I'm so embarrassed." And again, today it just rocks me. This was years ago, but I remember thinking how incredibly wrong that is, that here Daniel is living in a rubbish dump while I took his photo with a camera that probably would have fed him for a year. I could go back home to the warmth and security and love that I have from my 4 children and family, and he had to stay there and live in that horrendous rubbish dump. And it just made me feel that he felt that it was this great white savior coming in, and we're supposed to support him out of pity, which is just wrong. And I think the sooner that we all realize that charity is a two-way street, and you get more out of it through the connection with these communities than you will give, then we can solve the issue of poverty. I mean, I take donors over that have an awful lot of material wealth, and without a doubt, by day 2, they will all say to me, "What is the story? These people are happier than me and my community at home." And I firmly believe that is because they are connected to their community. They believe in this concept of Ubuntu. They're grateful for what they have got. They live in the present moment, and they look after each other. They see themselves as part of one human race, and they know when someone else suffers, they will suffer, so they look after them to make sure that they don't. And I saw that with my daughter. I took my 14-year-old into the rubbish dump once, my little daughter Mia, and she was incredibly strong and brave, and then halfway through she just broke down, and the community in that rubbish dump came out and they were offering her their incredibly precious cups of water, and they brought a little stool out for her to sit down on, and they were rubbing her back. And it was an Ubuntu lesson. That was a massive one, because I looked at them and went, Mia's crying, my little 14-year-old is crying. They know she can leave and be fine, but I could see Mia's pain etched on their faces, and they needed her to be better so that they could feel better. And I just thought, we all need to live like that. And it doesn't matter that they're miles away and we don't see them every day. They're out there, and any little thing we can all do to help and connect with them, we're going to really grow from, and it's going to enrich us. So yeah, I'm a very
Thank you for sharing those stories. It feels like Ubuntu is a lesson that that we all need to learn from, because I think it goes back to what we're here for, and we've lost sight of that. But I'd love you to.
Sorry, I think there's and I've done a study on it. And there's lots of studies out there, but there's a correlation. That question of how much is enough is really important. How much is enough money for us? And it's different for everyone. And I absolutely respect everyone's level on that, provided they actually ask the question. Because I think that there is a real correlation between consuming too much wealth, and then we get bigger houses with bigger fences and we dislocate ourselves from the community. And I think we then lose that connection. And I think that's part of the problem. So if we could all work out how much was enough for us and give the rest away to something that you're passionate about, whether that's environment, animals, people, you'll be happier for it. I firmly believe that.
That's a brilliant philosophy. And doing that intentionally rather than having a goal and as soon as you get there, having the next goal and the next goal of material wealth is what just keeps us in this cycle of disconnection, really, and busyness. Please share with us your 1 in a million campaign, because I'd just love our listeners to be able to take action from this. And it is so easy and so, brilliant. Just please go ahead, Cass.
Thanks, Carolyn. So I'm constantly thinking of ways to make so they can sustainable, both from a program implementation point of view and from a fundraising point of view. I feel like because of an amazing team on the ground and our monitoring and evaluation we have in our communities, I feel like I could die tomorrow and the implementation would continue on. But I haven't cracked the fundraising. It won't continue on without the fundraising. Both sides of our business need each other. So I'm always, there's lots of different ways you can get involved in a fundraising point of view. We have high net worth donors that give money. We have child sponsors that give money, turning up to what we call our One Human Race in March, where you run, walk, swim 85 kilometres over the month of March to support the 85% of our girls that get cut and sold into marriage. But what we're about to launch is called 1 in a million. It's kind of like that concept of, are you 1 in a million, to support our children over there as well. And it's asking people to just give $1 a month. So trying to create a non-financial barrier, basically. We're targeting our communities in Africa as well. I'd love to be the first NGO that got substantial funds out of Africa. So it will enable us to move from currently our 47 schools, empowering 33,000 children in those schools, to go to 500 schools, empowering 400,000 children.
Wow.
And because it's such sticky money, I don't know if anyone would stop that annual payment of $12 a month. Then we can rely on it, we can budget for it, we can, program plan for 3 years in advance, we can take on new schools whilst we just grow to hopefully 10 million, people. So that's the fundraising side of it. But it's also to try and solve this goal I had to bring that concept of Ubuntu to our Western community. So the connection, I really wanted to connect people, as we've talked about. So if you sign up to 1 in a million, you will become part of the 1 in a million / One Human Race community of So They Can. So you can opt in or out to how much interaction you have. But generally we would have 4 texts or little videos that you'll be sent, which is nothing more than a minute or 2 minutes, but just that you'll get pinged every now and then if you sign up for it, if you want it, and you'll get a gorgeous video from the ground of some kids dancing, or a woman who has just been empowered through our microfinance, or something that just takes you out of your everyday detail of the hard slog to live in the present moment. Remember Ubuntu, remember the connection, and just to realize what you've invested in by becoming part of that 1 in a million community. So it's hopefully as well going to help us back here remember the Ubuntu African classroom lessons that I'm lucky enough to have. So that's the concept of 1 in a million.
That's amazing.
And we have Neil Finn from Crowded House as one of our ambassadors. He's an incredible ambassador. He's been with us for about 10 years now. He's an amazing human being, and he, along with Crowded House, have written a song to launch 1 in a million for us, which will be on their album next year. And so hopefully we can get as much traction as possible. But yeah, if anyone out there has got ideas of how to spread or purpose businesses and databases, that they'd be happy to share it to help us get to our goal, that would be absolutely incredible.
I love it. I love it. And when are you launching this campaign?
So we're officially launching it on the 12th of November at our global dinner party. However, it'll take some time to get to that many people, so it will always be there. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So look, this podcast is being recorded at the end of October. So the campaign will be live when it goes to air, and we'll include links in the show notes. I will be signing up and I'll be sharing it amongst friends, family, network, whatever I can. I love what you're doing, Cass. Thank you so much for all you're doing in bringing Ubuntu to the Western world. I know this conversation is one that I'm going to carry with me for a long time. And thank you. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, please just email me. It's Cassandra@sotheycan.org.
Wonderful. Cass, I feel like we've only just scratched the surface, and maybe down the track I can convince you to come back on for a further chat. But thank you so much. I know you've got to rush off, so thank you for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?